Ready?
I'm ready.
Is everybody ready?
Yes.
Big thumbs up.
All right, here we go. We are talking about fear. Oh, there's a little guy. Hey there. If you have anything printed or whatnot, or if you're looking at anything, the word sadness is what today was supposed to be, but we decided, no, I'm sorry, not see, that's why I changed it, because I want to say scared was supposed to be today, but we changed the word to fear. So we have changed the whole emotion to fear and not scared.
Throwing a wrench.
Throwing a wrench, yeah. Because apparently I keep saying them the same in my head.
Right, you should not.
That's why we changed it.
They are different, which you're going to talk about.
I am. I'm fearful now.
Okay.
All right. So again, to recap, the first 20 minutes is going to be understanding emotion. The second 20 minutes is going to be hearing God's emotion. And this third one, which we're going to hopefully get through and tell us stories, unless you want more, get to discussion for 20 minutes so we can all discuss and talk. There's going to be a little bit of God in the first one, which I think is fun, and then a lot more God in the second one. So we have more God throughout this one. Yeah. So to recap, we talked about sadness last week, and I wanted to see again if anybody had any experiences in the past week to share that sadness kind of showed up a little bit more because you were aware of it and you kind of saw it somewhere that you would normally not see it. Anybody have anything happen?
I feel like I'm thinking about sadness a lot more right now, just because every time I watch the news, I feel burdened by the reality of the situation that we're in. And then also just in doing study on lament, I'm really, I've been focusing or thinking about sadness from a theological point of view in a way that maybe I hadn't done in the past as well. And it's really been enlightening for me to be having that discussion along with the class, because I'm seeing the value of really being able to talk about sadness as a process of getting through, of moving towards something that's healthier and better. And that's not ever been natural for me. And so this has really been a good balance. It's been a good time for this class to come. And so I don't know that I have a story about exactly what I was sad about this past week, but just the whole concept is really, I think, bringing a whole new light to me that's I don't know if you could have picked a better time for this class to be presented than right now. And I feel like it's really something that I'll draw strength from, and in the months and years to that will come. So thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were kind of looking for, is just it being up front for you.
Right. I think it's just about starting to have a little more awareness. Goodness knows that if we watch the news, we can all find some anger in there. In fact, probably there's too much anger in what we're watching and not enough discussion of the sadness and the fear. And that, again, is where we connect. Like, I can relate to people who have different opinions than me if they started talking about their sadness about a situation rather than just being critical of my point of view. And I like that idea. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kelly.
Yep. Kevin?
So Ryan and Susan, y'all know, because I emailed you last week, but 2 weeks ago, we had sadness in our family because y'all all knew that y'all had been praying for my Aunt Zette, who took care of my dad along with my mom for the last 4.5 years. And she had that really strange transverse myelitis attack that kind of messes up the nerves in your midsection, and therefore she hadn't walked since December 6th. And we just thought, we were kind of been sad over not responding to the OT, not responding to the PT, and and not being able to have visitors, because she's like me, a real extrovert and loves, seeing and hugging people and everything. And so we were already experiencing that. And she had to have a trip from the skilled nursing to the ER to have emergency surgery on a bad bed sores because she couldn't feel the pain that bed sores cause. And they had just gotten really bad. And a doctor there that we didn't even know exists. There's a palliative care doctor now in our thing that helps take doctors' information for the patient, all of them, and put it together and try to make a quality of life changes for the person.
Right.
And many times it's preparing them for hospice. And that was the case for my aunt, because his own mother, we found out, had the same attack and the same kind of path. And that's not meaning everybody who has that attack is going to be terminal. It's just a few people, older people usually, and she's only like 73 or 74, so she's not that old. Yeah. But anyway, she was given 3 to 6 months by a doctor who's seen this before and his own mom, and so that was sad to begin to deal with that. But her faith, 24 hours later, she calls my mom and says, okay, my pity party's done. I'm ready to go see the Lord, see my parents, see my husband. Let's not cry anymore. Let's just, she told her some things she wanted at her funeral and said, let's not talk about it anymore. So I don't know if that's a good psychological approach to the issue, but it spoke to her faith. And we've had 2 successful Zooms because the local nurse staff and stuff will get her on for us, and with my folks and then my kids. And I think that's cheered her up. But everybody's processing this thing of having a loved one that gets terminal news and you can't even go and hug their neck and cry with them. Yeah. And that's happening not just in our family, that's happening all over the world. Right. And I just never did. I knew that, I'd seen it on the news, like Kelly said, but until you experience in your family how that makes you feel sad, but also in a box, where you can't do anything that you would normally do. I mean, you give it to God, but you always had that way of hugging and being with the person when they got news like that. And I can't think of a time in the world history that we didn't have that ability. Nobody in the Bible experienced that. I mean, they were with their loved ones when they were, I guess the lepers did.
There's
so
lepers.
Yeah.
It's not right now the same for you though. That's really tough.
Right.
Yeah.
But we haven't known lepers in our lifetime and known where we couldn't be with somebody because of a disease. Yeah. This is a first time.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
and we will keep praying for your family.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing that, Kevin. And just, it's good to help us understand that it is hitting home and for us to kind of know that is happening. All right.
Yeah. We're going to pray to get us started. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time to gather together as a community, as a one body, to celebrate you and to understand you better. Lord, to connect with you. Lord, help us to understand fear, to understand it so that it can be used to glorify you, but also to connect with you. Lord, we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so are y'all ready? We're going to talk about fear. We're going to start out with emotional terminology. We came up with some other terms we might need to kind of cover before we move into the actual emotion to help everybody. Go ahead.
Right. I was looking for your signal.
Give me the
signal.
So what we're going to look at, I have 3 things. This looks like a lot, but it's not. And this is just to kind of, like in college or before you had a test or you started a new class, they said skim over everything so that when you hear it, you'll kind of think about it. That's what I want you to do, is kind of skim over these. So let's think about fear, worry, and anxiety. These are all different, but they're used interchangeably a lot when we're talking to people because we're not quite aware of where our you are here is. So you remember back in the map looking for the candle store, the first thing we do is we figure out where am I? What am I feeling? So you got to find where you are. So you are here, and kind of decide which one that is: fear, worry, anxiety. And there are different ways to kind of think through that and understand what to do. And it also helps you understand what you're anxious about or worrying about. So just keep in mind fear, worry, anxiety, different. And we'll learn more about that on the feeling grid. The second thing is fear versus sadness. Fear and sadness are not the same. I'm not going to talk about them the same at all. I think they can overlap, definitely.
They're comorbid. They go together, right?
Mhm.
People who are anxious can be depressed. People who are depressed can become anxious. So they go together. They complement each other emotionally.
But they're different when you learn about them. So the similar type of reaction of behaviors is crying. So a lot of times you're gonna, like, when I get mad, I cry. When I get happy, I cry. When I get, or withdrawing. A lot of times we withdraw as well. And those can be from fear or sadness. So it's helpful to know which one it is. For me, if I'm thinking about someone sitting on a park bench and they're sitting there crying, and I've had that happen in Bastrop once. I was running by and I'm like, I think I need to turn around and just kind of ask them if they're okay. But I'm kind of like, are they sad or are they scared? And knowing what they're going through is helpful. Sad is just sit with me. Scared is let's talk through what you're scared about or fearful of. Which is the third bullet on there is our terminology from last week, which is listen. So listening to know where you are or the other person is. And the third one is afraid versus fearing God. Yes.
With fear and sadness, remember we also talked that anger is what we use to protect ourselves from fear and sadness. So they are connected, but they are still different.
Right. All right. So the third one is afraid versus fearing God, which this kind of crept in with us when we started talking about teaching it. I think that, are they different to you? Are there, you can nod or not, or yes, or, all right. So there could be a difference. That's where we hit.
When we looked up fear in the Bible from like a concordance, you're going to find a whole lot more uses of that word probably than any of the other emotion words that we're using. Afraid, fear, but a lot of them have to do with fearing God, and a lot of them have to do with being afraid. So there's those two different distinct types of fear that are discussed.
Right. And because we're working through the Bible and talking about emotions in the Bible, it's important to distinguish between those two when we're talking about God. So that's what we decided to do. So we kind of think they have two meanings. So I think you need to click it.
So that's that's the primary one we're going to talk about mostly a lot today, is afraid versus fearing.
Yeah, that third one is, we're going to now blow up this third bullet. We're going to talk about fear and being afraid. So I don't remember. I think it's called fearing God. Y'all are all in front of the top of my PowerPoint. Sorry. So fearing God, which is, we called it purposeful fear. I changed it from my notes. Purposeful fear. And to fear God is to be reverent to God's power. So let's think about being reverent to God. When Isabel and James were little, we all started praying, and we would talk about how to pray in the sense of, you can say whatever you want, but you need to be reverent while we are praying and talking to God and spending time with God and reading the Bible or at church. We need to be reverent to God, to his power. It's kind of what we're thinking here, but also mercy and love in every part of God. So, where are my notes? So if we do not fear God, it's troubling, right? We're supposed to fear God. So we are supposed to have some fear, but fearing God is different. So when we fear God, we show his reverence to his power. With that way, we can open ourselves to empowering, for him to empower us. So to fear God, we must humble our egos and our pride and admit that he's more powerful, which leads to connection with God, right? Go ahead.
It's basically saying, I'm not God. You are, and that's the reverence we're showing.
Correct. So when I think of not fearing God being troubling, I think of the minute my kids kind of look back at me, not fearful, not scared that they're in trouble. I'm apparently doing something wrong, because whenever I'm saying, this is what happened and you should follow the rules, and this is what I'm going to say to you, or, your dad's going to be home soon, and they just kind of look at me. Ours don't do that. But the moment you realize your child is not afraid of you, that's where fear needs to be. There needs to be a fear of a parent. Just like I grew up needing, you're supposed to fear God, but he's still loving. And then the other one that I want to think, let's put it in Bible terms. Let's rethink Moses meeting the burning bush and God in Exodus 3:6 without fear. So what it does say in the Bible is, then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. What if he didn't get afraid? What if God said all this, put the bush on fire, made the bush not burn, and he's like, oh, hey, God, what'd you need?
What's up?
What's up, God? That doesn't work. Like, nothing is going to come out of that that's going to be powerful or amazing, and that makes us wonder if he's God. So
you again.
So you must fear God, right? So we think that's important. Go ahead. So our fear of God opens our ability to become empowered by God. This is kind of, we say this a little bit more than once in here. I think this is important to note. Our fear of God opens our ability to become empowered by God. God can't use us if we don't fear him. That's my thought. Go ahead. So admitting God's power overall connects us with God. It actually creates a connection for us with God because we are admitting to his power. So we are being reverent to his power and his ability. So Psalm 112:1, praise the Lord, blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commandments.
Wow.
It's joyful to fear the Lord. We gain joyfulness from that.
I'm blessed, that's empowered.
Yeah.
So now we have the regular being afraid.
So being afraid, which we like to call horizontal fear.
Right.
So fear or being afraid of something in the world. What's that look like? So what's like being afraid look like?
Anyone have something that they're afraid of?
Just off the top of your head.
Cows.
What?
Cows.
Cows.
I
Cows.
live on a ranch, but I'm afraid of cows.
Okay, that's a good one. That's perfect. I'm going to click mine. I'm afraid of tornadoes. Completely illogical when there's a tornado nearby.
Yeah.
Or in a movie. Like
There doesn't even have to be a tornado nearby. There could be, Susan calls it the hook in the weather.
there's a hook.
She became
yeah.
a amateur meteorologist while living in Alabama. And so she fears the hook. I couldn't describe it. She's
happens,
pointed it
yeah.
out. I don't
Yeah.
see a hook.
It does happen. So we say tornadoes, clowns, cows. Those are kind of the simple things. I want to say fun, simple things, but they're not fun.
It's not
But-
to you if you're afraid of them.
It is an illogical fear. And I kind of put that over where an anxiety of an unknown fear of unknown. Why am I scared of that? Maybe lack of control. But failure is one. I mean, the fear of failing. So we don't step out and do certain things. So these are more worldly fears where we should be relying on God, but we are afraid. So I actually just wanted to say this quickly. I went for a run, I guess on Monday, and I'm out running and I fell. I fall all the time when I run. And I have not fallen in a long time. And I actually I used to fall all the time before we moved to Bastrop, but I also had a lot of back pain in the beginning of living in Bastrop. So I fear falling. I don't want to fall. I don't want to hurt my back. I don't want to make anything happen to make my pain come back, but running helps. So I got to run. So I was running and I turned sideways sometimes to just stretch out like my legs as I'm running sideways. And I just felt it coming and I just tripped and flew sideways. And I was like, just fall into it, just lean into it and just fall. And so I fell and I just laid down on the asphalt. And so as I'm laying on the asphalt, I'm like, I'm sure somebody's looking at me out the window. So I got up kind of quickly so people would know I wasn't hurt. I don't know. But as I got up and started running, I just kind of felt invigorated. And I'm like, I fell and I didn't get hurt. I fell. I'm not going to be afraid of falling anymore. I'm good. And I did. I kind of felt better, not adrenaline, but actually felt better because I conquered it. So when I am afraid, I put my trust in him. We're going to fall. And we have to just be okay with knowing that we're going to be fearful of something. And that's simply put in Psalm 56:3, and that's my little emphasis added with the ... There's nothing else between those words, but it looked better. So when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. That's all God wants us to do.
Sean, you have a question? You raised your hand. Emily,
I didn't know you could do that.
I didn't know you could do that. That's pretty
I
cool.
didn't know you could do that either. Sean figured it out.
Teacher, you.
I was just thinking, like, I think when I was growing up, I had a fear of like not doing well in school, but it was like a positive fear to some extent because it motivated me to really study. But I was just thinking, as I was sitting here and Ashley's inside at the table, and she's been working on this final for hours, and I thought we pass down the fears that we have to our children. You know, even though she has this amazing grade in her class, and I think she said she could get a 40 and still make an A.
I
I'm
would
like,
be at that kitchen table.
do half of it, it'll be fine. But it's like, I've passed that fear on where you have to make the A every time, no matter what.
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah.
Yeah, we show our kids what to be
Mhm.
afraid of. That's one of those things when I'm not a fan of bugs. I was not like this kid who walked around picking up lizards and snakes and picking up frogs and stuff. Not me at all. And so I did not want my son to have that same fear. So I was like, hey, look, a bug. And he's like, oh, that's cool. Can I pick it up? I'm like, yes, you can pick it up. And he's like, Dad and I are on the bug team. And I'm like, yay. So I still don't want to pick up frogs and earthworms and all that kind of stuff. I'll do it if I have to, but you should have seen me when there was a snake in our yard. I had
Yeah, it was hilarious.
I disappeared for 2 minutes to get like a shovel, 2 shovels, a rake, gloves, a box, and I don't even think there's something
And
else.
I wanted to pick it up to be a pet. So I'm like, what's wrong with you? Just pick up the snake. He's like, no.
So-
We did. We picked up a snake. And by the way, we made it a pet. And then it got loose in our house for 2 months. We had nobody come over and visit. It was fun.
Yeah.
Um,
We had our own quarantine.
yes, we did. Back in 2011.
we have known quarantine in our house.
All right. So Emily, what you said is very true with kind of what you were talking about. A little bit of fear is good. And we wanted to bring that up. So is there a healthy amount of fear? Absolutely. Small amounts of anxiety keep us alert and focused. They keep us from stepping on snakes. They keep us from getting hurt, falling off cliffs. Apparently taking selfies is not non-fear based because that doesn't help people.
Activity.
But a little bit of fear, you can be alert and ready. But too much fear, you get stuck. Remember, this is horizontal fear. You can have as much fear of God as you want, as long as you talk to God about it and you're being reverent. That's the other kind of fear. This is horizontal, to where they're just tornadoes. I mean, if he would just buy me a storm shelter, I would have no fear of tornadoes anymore, because we get so many tornadoes in this area.
Yes.
We had one.
We had
So-
F0.
That's scary. So too much fear kind of gets us stuck. So I want to go back over, did I say that? I did.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. So just to kind of recap, I don't know what that says up there. Being afraid,
horizontal
versus vertical is what we're going to look at. So horizontal versus vertical. I just wanted to kind of recap these. And this is honestly just my thinking as we were processing through it. And I'm like, because we have a lot of ahas, and y'all are welcome for us not putting all of it in here, because we just sit and process it and talk. We're quite boring, but everybody is right now, so it's okay.
You're our only friends.
Yeah, pretty much. So anger, let's talk about anger. When you think of anger horizontally, we do it to protect. So when we look sideways, we're like, I got to protect myself, and we use anger. But if we go vertical with our anger, we're humbled, because we can't be angry. We can be angry with God, but to connect with him, that anger, you have to let the anger go. So you become humbled by, I don't want to be angry with God, and I want to grow close to him. That's how you grow close to him. Sadness, we talked about sadness. Horizontally, if we sit in our sadness and we just revel in our sadness and we don't want to get out, sometimes we do get stuck even though we want to get out, and it does take time. That's where we remain depressed. So we kind of stay depressed. But the other way is to work through your sadness and get stronger. And sometimes that takes a long time. There's no time frame. It's based on the person. And I know with my physical pain, when it was so high consistently, they had me put a journal down because I didn't feel any different. It hurt that much every day. And they're like, you have to notice the minuscule difference. So if you write it down, you might see growth and movement, but you're still in pain. And that's kind of what sadness could be. As long as you're moving forward and you're trying and thinking and you have help and you go to God and you go to people who are godly, you can grow stronger through your sadness. And then it's easier to go through it next time because you know what to do with it. Fear. This is the one we'll hang on for the rest of the time. Fear is, we hide. I kind of thought of the word, you hide when you have fear. So we go hide.
That's the horizontal side.
That's the horizontal. So what do we do when we're fearful? We hide from what we need to do about it. I want a storm shelter. I have no fear hiding from tornadoes. So we stay where we are and we just sit and go, oh my gosh. And that's completely biblical, by the way. But if we don't hide and we look vertical, when you think of that little toddler, that little 19-month-old who gets spooked and is sitting on the floor by him or herself, and then they hear a loud noise and they turn and look for their mom or dad and they raise their hands up immediately. And they pick them up and they hold them. I couldn't find a good clip art for that, but that's really what is kind of happening. So, question? No? Oh, he's deleting the hand. So we want to allow God to work with us. Is this where I talk about the two things?
Yeah.
So I'm going to quickly talk about two things in the Bible that actually go with fear and hiding. And I think we don't think about these as fear. But one, you might think about it, Jonah and the whale, right? Everybody knows about Jonah. Jonah 1:1-3 is basically God tells him he needs to go to Nineveh, right? It's a great veggie tale on it as well. Go to Nineveh, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. He went to hide, right? So we all know where he ends up, in the belly of a whale.
Right, but even that, the storm, like the people are like, what is going on? We got to throw stuff off and maybe we've done wrong, but he's still down below hiding in the storm too. Right. I'm sorry, guys. It's probably me.
Which is not helping everybody else either. So when you hide, you don't know what it's going to do. So he ends up doing what God wants him to do, and he does a very good job, but he took the long road for God. You can take the long or short road.
And I'm pretty sure everyone in Nineveh came to know God. Like when we bring our fears to God and allow God's presence with our fear, then we are allowing him to connect with us, opening up a door.
So relying on God. The second one is, this is kind of interesting. I never thought about this, so y'all can definitely give me input on what you think. But we're working through the kids in Mark, which always helps because you read more Bible and then you come up with some ideas of what you're learning in your other Bible study. And so we're doing the parables, and we did the hide your light under a bushel or a basket, which is interesting because it would have burned. Or the bed, or like in a drawer, like it says in there, don't put it under the bed or in a basket or anywhere. The way that we hiding your light, I'm gonna have to read it so I don't get lost on the parables because they're hard for me. Hiding your light under a bushel. Jesus gives a parable that created the famous song, of course. When reading this, I thought of the three types of people that he could be talking to, because we know the religious leaders, they don't even want the light. And then we know the disciples and apostles and Jesus, we know that they all are saying, I'm in, I want to talk about Christ crucified, or not yet, but I want to talk about what you're teaching us. We're interested. But what about the middle people? Just the people, like just some of the other Jewish people, or the Romans, or even Herodians, the ones we all listed, all the different people. What about them? I think the people listening and witnessing Jesus and his miracles, because some of them were baptized by John, maybe not the ones, maybe they're not hiding their light, but then there are others who are just walking and listening and getting healed, right? Well, but not really wanting to commit to what Jesus is saying, but they're getting some of it before the blasphemy, of course. They're understanding what's going on, but they're fearful. They're full of fear. It's like, I think I'm just going to stick with where I am and take my old rules and just follow what I'm supposed to do. So they are hiding the light under a bushel, because the light is the knowledge of Christ to me. And they are saying, I'm just going to be fearful about this. So they're hiding. They're not sharing it. Jesus is saying, do not be afraid. In fact, he's yelling, no, right? He's saying, no, don't hide it under a bushel. He's yelling no, and they teach kids to yell no because everybody wants to hide it under a bushel. It's scary. So that is fear to me, finding that in the Bible. And he's specifically saying, do not hide it. I want you to share it. So I thought that was really cool. I just always sang the song and I didn't think all as much about it until today.
Fear opens the door.
So fear opens the door. That's the big thing. Fear opens the door for us to connect with God. If we fear the awesome presence of God, then we are giving him reverence, acknowledgement, and glory. This allows us to be humbled and open to God's comfort.
So briefly, I'm gonna, before we look at the feeling grid and see if there's any questions about it, I wanted to talk about worry. Worry, worry, worry. This is what we all hear about, right? Oh, my favorite thing I ever heard from my mom was, well, Brian, just don't worry about it. Mom, thanks. Goodness, if only I had thought not to worry, my problems would have been solved long ago. So worry is something we all have. It's something that is not going to go away. But what does it really mean that we worry? This is a serious question for you guys. I mean, I worry about my kids driving, and you guys should too. I worry about the economy. I worry about performing well as a practitioner or on exams when I was in school, like Emily and her children. What do all of these types of worries have in common? Any ideas? Go ahead, Kevin.
We can't hear you.
Can't hear you yet.
Not trusting the Lord.
Maybe. I trust the Lord. I don't trust my kids driving some days.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So,
But trusting the Lord that you raised them, right, taught them right, and that he's going to be watching over them when they're not in your eyesight. I mean, that's a huge trust thing when you hand those keys over, because there's a lot more things besides just the driving that they're accessible to.
but how does that have to do with the economy? Like, how are all three of those types of worries connected, right? What do all three of those worries have in common?
Well, fear. Fear of what could happen.
You're close.
And lack of control. I had help on that. Lack of having control over it.
Close. You're very close.
Fear of what might happen.
Yep, close. You guys are so negative, though. There's a better answer, is that all of these worries mean that I care.
Oh, yep.
Those are all things I care about. Mm-hmm. I care about my children. I care about their safety. I care about the economy. I care about doing well as a professional. There are people who are taking the same test as Emily's daughter Ashley is. Uncertainty was a guess. I couldn't see that. So uncertainty, Michaela chimed in that one. But there are some people taking that test who don't care. They're not worried about that test. They aren't fearful of the test. They may have the same grade as Ashley, but they're not worried because they don't care. But I don't understand that, so I'm similar to Ashley, I guess. I was a nerdy kid, maybe still am. But worry means that we care. If you didn't care, then you wouldn't worry. Right? There's things that we don't worry about. Well, I don't care. You guys probably haven't cared about my kids driving today because it hasn't affected you. And it's not that you don't care about my kids. I'm sure you're all nice people and you do. But really, it's not the same kind of care that I do. The same way I don't have the same care about the test that Ashley's taking. Because, well, it doesn't affect me and I don't have to take tests anymore. Thank goodness. Yay. So worry. They say don't sweat the small stuff. I disagree. I think we're going to sweat the small stuff. I think the small stuff means it's things that we care about. You guys don't care about Texas Tech football? I do. But also, I don't worry because I know what's going to happen. We're probably going to lose. So it's not that big a deal either. But it doesn't mean that it isn't important to me. So when you think about somebody else saying that they're worried about this and you say, oh, don't worry about it, what you're saying to them is don't care.
Well, or you're also saying, I don't care what is important to you or what you're worrying about.
Right.
So that's, you can hear, I'm really worried about this, and you can turn it into a connecting moment. And it is a type of fear, but it gives you a way to connect with them and understand what's going on to them. And I'm horrible at this. I just am. I know I'm a nice person, but I
don't care. Well, but Susan and I worry about different things. Like
Right.
we worry differently, and that's okay. It just means that's how we worry differently. When we brought our kids home from the hospital, I was sitting there like changing a diaper, and then I just looked up. What if they do drugs? And she's like, what if they don't eat tomorrow? Like, so, you know, Susan tends to worry more about very present things, very real things. I worry about fantasy things that may or may not be a problem, but they creep up in my head. Yes, I said it out loud. You worry about real things. Let's see.
that should have been in the emotional terminology, I think.
Yeah.
That would have been a good one.
Is the word care in your emotional grid or caring?
No,
A
because
huge.
care is a verb more than an adjective.
Okay. But I've never heard, Brian, and I've had to, listen to lots of sermons on worry and lessons and stuff. I can't recall anybody boiling it down to that simple a definition. And I appreciate, that's profound, really, for me.
Good.
Because then you can have greater empathy
Mm-hmm.
for the person who's worrying about something different than you're worrying about. Because you know that their basis is care for
Right.
that situation more than to irritate you.
Right. And then the fear or the problem, I guess, is this something we need to care about, right? When they're infants, caring about my children's non-existent potential drug use is not an immediate need to care about. It's something I care about, my kids' future uncertain immediate drug use, but not necessary at that time.
But I think what is also important to talk about is we're not saying worry is sinful. We're not saying worry is bad. We're not saying worry is you haven't spent enough time with God. Worry is human, and we do worry. And so the fact that it is on top of something that we care about, that creates the connecting and the fellowship is what I think. And yes, people can worry too much, but I'm usually a little too transparent when I'm like, okay, this is enough worrying. We need to move on to something, but that's also being authentic with them. So there's a window, but it's not sin. And then we push it aside.
Now you've said the second and even more profound thing that's never been said from the pulpit that I've heard of. And I'll ask Kelly and Sean if they've ever heard it. Worry is not a sin. That's huge. Because I've always been taught that you're doubting God when you worry. And even though I knew that was natural to worry, and as long as you gave it over to God, then you could ask for forgiveness and you were forgiven. But when the moment you worried, that was a sin. So I'm going to ask Kelly and Sean if that's what what their opinion of that is. Did I have a too narrow of interpretation for some reason my whole life?
My whole life.
Well, I'll jump in there just to, I think there's an automatic, inference that we have that when I say, when we hear those verses, do not worry, that we automatically say that if I do, then that's a lack of having a lack of faith or a lack of trust in God. So when I begin that journey with worry, then all of a sudden that means automatically, I think, that we automatically go down that trail. I'm wrong. And
Right.
I totally agree that I think it's the extreme level of when it's consuming, when it's overwhelming, is when that
Right.
becomes
That's the
next
window.
level.
And think horizontal versus vertical. If you're worrying about things that are horizontal, I would say that you're hiding, that you're probably not focused on doing those things. But to worry itself exists, and in and of itself, it isn't. But if it consumes you and takes you away from the vertical, there's so many times there, David is asking God to protect him from people who are pursuing him. Holy cow, I'm worried. He had to fake being mad so that people wouldn't catch him. Abraham told Sarah to pretend he was his sister, because he was worried what would happen to him, not what would happen to her.
So
There was a talk later that night, I'm telling you.
but those lead, I think it can lead to sin, just like anger
Right.
can lead to sin. And just
Right,
like,
right.
That's why there's a horizontal, vertical way we kind of talk about it. And so yeah, there's a window. It is, you're supposed to pray about it and give it to God. You're also, as soon as God tells you something, you're not supposed to go out and ask everybody what they think and maybe change your mind. That's also sinful too, but that's not focusing on God. So
And I'm going to get to the care part as well in just a minute, and kind of back up that statement as well.
Okay, good.
I'm going to move it. Oh, Milena has a question. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, I'm going to do this just for a moment.
hello.
Being on and asking a question. My post-shower look. I was thinking that, Jesus exhibited something that we would kind of think of as worry in the garden whenever he was just asking the Lord to take away this cup. And so whatever he did, the way he expressed it was not sinful. We know that. But he was also experiencing dread, perhaps, or I don't know what other emotion, but just the thought of not wanting to have to, maybe a fear of having to go through what he was having to go through. I don't know exactly all that it was, but it shows us that we can anticipate something with dread, or I just have that fear that sometimes looks like worry or is worry and not be simple. But at the same time, he gave all of that to the Lord and gave his whatever fear he might have been experiencing, or whatever dread, or whatever apprehension, or whatever, he gave that all over and trusted God to guide him to do exactly what he needed to do, no matter.
Right. So he actually role modeled what you do with worry. Come to think of it, he talked about his worry, he talked about his fear, he talked to God about it, and God was with him, and he's like, okay, so I kind of see it that way. That's the role modeling I would think of what to do with the worry when he is a human and he's on earth. And
He was praying for hours.
yeah.
And he took a break to go see what the other guys were praying about, and they weren't, and he's like, what is wrong with you? Aren't you guys a little worried? You don't have much longer with me. Like, I don't think I agree completely with what you're saying, Melinda.
Yeah, that was neat. That one we didn't dismiss on purpose, but we kind of have been doing areas of the Bible that don't get talked about a lot. But I didn't even think of that one with Jesus showing his worry and fear, because he does. But he also goes vertical, talks to God, he prays, and then I think he's like, okay, we've done that, let's move on. But he's also Jesus. That was that's hard to do.
And he is also, which is kind of key, is even though he was upset, I shouldn't use the word upset. Sorry, Brian. He was discouraged by his disciples who fell asleep on him.
Yeah.
And sometimes we misalign our fear and put it on our closest loved one because they aren't doing enough or paying attention enough for the moment. In other words, it seems like as couples, one person has that great worry, dread, concern for a time period of the day and the other person doesn't, and then that can make the person who's experiencing it be really go from that worry to anger at that person for not realizing how much they're in that situation, you know. And so I think that's another part of this, that not only are we called to handle our own fear, but we're called to see it in those close to us and respond compassionately at that moment, instead of later.
Absolutely. I'm going to move us along. If you have questions about the feeling grid, shoot us an email. But we're running close to out of time, so I want to make sure we cover this. So this is the portion where we talk about hearing God's emotion. This phrase, "do not be afraid," appears everywhere in the Bible. And most of the time, I think it gets misinterpreted a little bit. We hear Moses, God tells this to Joshua with Moses: "Do not be courageous, do not be afraid." Then like 4 more times in the first chapter of Joshua, "Do not be afraid." And if someone told me, even God told me that, "Hey, I want you to go march around the city 7 days and then just yell at the walls and not be afraid," like, sorry, that's trusting that is hard, and that fear exists. But I want to talk about do not be afraid because I think it gets misinterpreted. I think that we hear this from God and we hear this from messengers and angels and dreams and all sorts of ways, but I think we're misinterpreting what it means. In these occasions, whether it is with God himself or an angel, God informs the individual to not be afraid. These people have not stated or expressed that they're afraid, but God recognizes that they are, and then he mentions it. That is empathy. That is the definition of empathy. It's recognizing an unstated, deeper level of emotion that might be present in another person. God is not telling us that we should never be afraid. He's recognizing that we have been, recognizing that we are. If we just go to Luke 1:13, right? We have an angel who appears with Zechariah and tells him not to be afraid because he's, in the temple, in this small room, doing his duty. And hey, I know you're old, but you're going to have a baby. And he's going to lead the way for the king.
But I think, isn't there, and y'all correct me, there is this, if you see God or an angel while you're in that place, usually that means you're going to die. I thought there was some kind of rule. Does anyone know that rule?
I don't know that.
No. Okay.
If you touch the ark, you would die. I know that.
If you saw an angel with a flaming sword, I'm telling you, I'm going to wonder if I'm about to die. That's just going to be my first thought.
Yeah.
Well, they probably don't look beautiful in flowing gowns. They look, it's scary.
Yeah. Luke 1:30, Mary is visited by Gabriel. First thing he says, "Do not be afraid." And then Luke 2:9-10, the shepherds out in the field, they're visited by an angel announcing Jesus' birth. And what does he say? "Do not be afraid." When we admit our fear, then we are comforted. These moments when you're before God, God is being empathic to our feelings, to our fears. He recognizes that it happens. And he's saying, now I want you to shift into the reverent fear, not fear afraid, but reverence and bow down and honor me type of fear, that blessed fear that says, I am God, and now you have nothing else to fear. Because all other fears are gone because you are in the presence of me. We have to admit our fear. There's often a misthought that fear is the enemy to faith. This is one I've heard quite a bit. If you are afraid, then you aren't faithful, right? I wholly disagree with this idea. I don't think that fear is the enemy to faith. I think that familiarity is the enemy to faith. When we get stuck hiding doing the old things that we've always done, I think that's what gets in the way of our ability to remain or find faith. If we stay in our comfort zone of fear and never do something about it, then you are dealing with an enemy to faith. Opening up about your fear brings God's comfort. 1 Peter 5, I already talked about that. Sorry. 1 Peter 5, 6 through 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Here we go. Cast all your anxiety or fear or worry on him, because he cares for you. I think God worries about me. That's why we have guardian angels. That's why we have those experiences in our lives where we get protected, because I think God cares about us and he worries for us.
I think it's kind of similar when you have kids and they reach the ages where you're supposed to just kind of sit back and you know this is going to be painful, but you have to allow them to go through it, and you just wait until you can be there with them. And I think that is not so much a worry. You just don't want them to hurt, but they're going to hurt. But you have to allow them to do that. And I think that's what God does.
Right.
But he's still with us.
Right. We had a great Bible study this week with our kids. As Susan said, we're working through Mark. And I don't remember exactly how the question came up. But we started talking about our own place in heaven. Like, do you know about heaven? What do you think of heaven? Are you going to heaven? And like, I was just amazed at our kids admitting, like, oh, I believe in heaven, but gosh, I don't even know. Like,
because sometimes I don't know if I'm going to go to heaven.
Right. I worry about it. I wonder about it. And they just talk so honestly. They humbled themselves before their parents who teach a Bible study with the church, who volunteer, who do all these things, who read their Bibles and have read it all the way through. They've seen all those things, and they just openly talked about their own fears. Oh my goodness, I was just amazed, because all it did was give us as parents the opportunity to comfort that fear, to correct, to inform, to identify where their needs are, and to be able to potentially provide those answers to those fears. When we want to normalize their doubts. Again, I don't think that doubting is the opposite of faith. I think doubting helps us learn how to strengthen our faith. And so then I'm also reminded of Philippians 4, 6 through 7. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So it's the idea that, not saying don't ever be anxious. It's saying when you are anxious, present this information with prayer, with petition to God. And the opposite of scared, opposite of fear on our feeling grid is peaceful. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is the whole principle. When you talk about your sadness, you find joy and hope, which are all part of the feeling grid. When you talk about your fears, you can find peace. And especially when it's vertical, and especially in relationships with the other people. When you open up and are vulnerable about those things, you can find peace. Any questions? Right on time. Good job, Susan. All right. Any questions or thoughts to add to this discussion about fear? We would love to hear about it. I'm going to take this off so we can all see each other. Stop share. There we are. Oh,
Feels so much less small.
Ooh, there. Any thoughts or questions, reactions? We'd love to hear input. Your own experiences of being vertical or with God about your fear.
Brian, I would love to have a long discussion with you. I'm just going to bring it up now, but the idea of fear being the opposite of peaceful, and once again, a fruit of the Spirit is peace. it's just interesting how the Spirit is trying to give us a healthy, help us to live in the way that we were created. But I was thinking of this past week. There was there's a controversy of churches. Should we meet now or not meet now? What's wise for churches to do regarding assemblies where we all come back together? And I was talking to someone, and their church was going to meet, and their church had a sign that said faith over fear. And it rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't know why. I think you kind of explaining it helped me understand it a little bit more, because I don't see that faith is the opposite of fear. I don't see that they have that. But I really like the fact that I feel like peaceful does. And I think that you can have wisdom and peace and still be faithful. And I think that really helped clarify where I am, because I really rejected that thought. Well, we're going to meet together because we're not afraid. We have faith. And I wanted to say, well, I do too.
Maybe some wisdom.
Yeah, but I do have peace over this. I'm not afraid, but I have peace in this. But I think peace allows for wisdom in this situation. So I think your comments really helped bring that processing that I was doing regarding that conversation into a really good place. So thank you for that.
Sure. And I like the fruit of the Spirit. I want to contemplate on that aspect with emotion too, and putting that together with these other emotions. I looked around for a pen and there wasn't one, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, I haven't figured out which one empowered is yet. So we might need to work on that one. But joy and peace are certainly right there in the list.
And faithful is under empowered. It's one of those under empowered.
That one. Go ahead.
I hate to hog the conversation here, but you've spurred so many thoughts out here. In First John, it says that love casts out fear.
That's what we have as the opposite of fear is love.
Yeah, and I noticed on the grid here that love is right in that section opposite as well. So that made a lot of sense.
This is a brilliant document.
Thank you.
with great depth and creativity.
Thank you.
That's it.
It's just bringing together everything.
Yeah.
I love, well, here we are talking, but I also just love your whole reassurance to us that Kevin really commented a lot about, that that we have a lot of times been taught that any kind of emotion, any kind of makes us suspect that we're not faithful. And so I think we're doing a better job of that with our children, but it's still but it's almost like grace that it's too good to be true, that we can still have these feelings and still be faithful. But the Bible, as you have continue to bring forth, has many examples of that, and God's emotions and our reflection of God. So anyway, thank you for that, for everything. Thank you. Okay, we're off.
We're muting. Bye.
Well, and I was going to share.
The birds were singing praise to that statement. Hallelujah. That's what they were saying.
I worked in a nursing home system where I provided care, and they had a common phrase in one of them called "Love is greater than fear." And one of my favorite examples of this was in dealing with skilled nursing facilities and assisted livings. One of the biggest fears is people falling. If someone falls, then it's broken bones, it's danger, it's surgery, they may not recover. And so their motto of love is greater than fear was that they actually had a lower fall rate by being less afraid of falling. Because sometimes what we do is when we put that worry so high, we actually create more tension and resistance that it creates it. And there was this, at a skilled nursing facility, there's this gentleman, he kept trying to stand. He was always by the nurses station. This is my favorite thing. He'd always try and stand, and they're like, sit down, they just yell at him, sit down. Like, you really need to talk to him about his behavior. Like, he's trying to stand. And if he falls, and he's not going to be able to stand, and if he falls, you know what? He's going to really hurt himself. And I said, okay, so I'll talk to him. I was like, so, I mean, you keep trying to stand. And he goes, yep. I was like, how come? He said, well, I'm just tired of sitting. And of course he is. He's been sitting all day in a wheelchair. And so all I did was take the time to help him. And I had someone show me how to hold the belt. And he just stood, and he can't hold himself long. And he's like, thank you, sat back down. A couple minutes later, we kept talking, he just stand up. And so instead of trying to be afraid of him falling, I just loved the idea and his need, and love him for who he is, and treat him like a person instead of this fearful thing that's going to cause us a lawsuit or a death or anything like that. It's just love him, and that's enough. And, you know, he sat back down, spent 4 minutes helping him stand, and he stopped.
Yep. So you got it. Emotions, to me, that's feelings are, we have to have feelings, or we're going to be scared of them all the time. We're going to be scared of falling. We're going to be scared of fear. I mean, it all just gets jumbled up to where we're just fearful. And I think, I wish I could do a study, but I don't have time. But all the masks, everybody wearing masks. And if you wear a mask, that's great. If you don't wear a mask, that's great. I'm a non-mask wearer. And I've kind of been that way. And our town was in lockdown. It was mandatory. So I wore the mask. But for me, it was just, I didn't want people to be afraid, because I understood what I read, and I understand based on my experience and my PhD and what I do, that reading it, I was fine not wearing a mask. But I wasn't doing it. I was doing it to show that I wasn't scared or wasn't fearful. I also didn't like people not seeing me smile. Like, that's so difficult. But also wearing it for other people. But I think it's such an obvious thing right now. It doesn't matter if you wear it or not. If you're wearing it, I'm thinking you're a little more fearful. And I am so empathic to that. Now and
there's a healthy dose of fear.
There's a healthy dose of fear going on. Yeah. So it's okay. But for me, I just am like, you see the mask, and you immediately know where some people are with their feelings right now. So you're kind of getting a freebie, if you think about it, when you go around and connect with people. And you know the ones who, you know, if you're more fearful based on how old the person is shopping, you know, so you can respond. So it's just very interesting to me to watch that and see that. When it was mandatory, people were not nice here in the stores. They were just, and I took the kids in on purpose. That was before masks were necessary. And I'm like, I just want you to feel this. And they're like, wow, it feels so different walking around in this grocery store. Aside from they have no eggs, toilet paper, butter, or meat. I mean, that is also worrisome at the house, but scary too when they're used to having everything they want in the grocery store. There were Pop-Tarts, we didn't get any, but just to feel that, you can feel it, and it's just so on the surface right now. And I'm like, this is good timing to just allow it to be out there. But empathy is the biggest thing. I mean, I think you just have to be empathic for where each individual is, and that's important.
Any other thoughts or ideas? Well, thank y'all again. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, I just appreciate y'all's realness, and the two takeaways for me is caring is a base for worry, and even my start of worry is a God-given emotion that probably produces that shows care and shows a healthy fear. And then as long as I don't totally live in worry, then I am, you know.
Right, and cast that worry to God. And that's
right.
Good.
So I appreciate that. That's pretty profound for me.
Great.
Thank you that was a good summary. Like, that's helpful to hear that it all connected. That was nice. I was going to say one thing before we all go. We keep talking about our kids being in this Bible study in Mark. And when I used to hear parents say, well, when we Bible study with our kids that read the Bible all the time, I'm like, oh, we don't do that enough. And so
Fear not.
Fear not, but I do. And so it's sticking. We're in our 3rd week where we do this every morning. And sometimes we argue, but we sit down and we pray that out. And then we Bible study it. And then we get up and we go do something else. But I've worked really hard for us to get to that. But I will tell you that I threw math off the table for 8 weeks. I mean, wholeheartedly, algebra and algebra 2. So I just wanted to point that out, that we keep talking about that. I'm always like, when you hear that, I'm like, it kind of makes me feel guilty when I'm not doing that. But it has been a blessing because it has brought up so much that you don't think is going to be brought up, and we use it, and we have to ask them, can we talk to everybody about what you said about heaven? And they're like, sure, you go right ahead. And so we have really loved that. But I just wanted to point out, it wasn't this thing, it's hard to do that. And I was really fearful of starting it for the umpteenth time and not continuing the Bible study. So I picked the shortest gospel. And we're in Mark 4, which is taking us 3 weeks.
Yeah. I'll give y'all a tip on studying Mark, and it's from Kelly's dad.
Yes.
Bob had the best sermons from Mark, and he always had a football lesson in every chapter. So there's one there. You just have to look. And if you don't know it, you ask him, you ask Kelly, and he'll probably remember.
We'll ask where, I guess, don't hide that football under the basket or under the bushel.
Right. That's
great. Yeah,
that's a Fumble-Rooski move, right?
Oh my gosh.
All right.
Well, thank y'all for being here tonight. It was good seeing all of you again and hearing you and seeing you a little bit, Melena. Bye, everybody. Bye. Oh, you guys.